Life had always felt predictable. I wasn't unhappy, at least I didn't think I was. Married for 10 years with 2 kids under 10, I thought we had a stable partnership. Sure, the spark we once had dimmed, but wasn't that just what happened over time? I was content, or so I told myself. Work kept me busy, and the demands of parenthood left little time for anything else. My wife, let's call her Laura, seemed busy but happy, thriving in her job at a well-known company under the leadership of a high-powered executive. But life has a way of pulling the rug out from under you, often when you least expect it. The day it all started was as ordinary as any other. Laura had rushed out the door to get to work after complaining about being late for an early meeting. In her haste, she forgot her phone on the kitchen counter. It buzzed once, then twice, and my attention drifted to it as I sipped my coffee. She rarely left her phone unattended. Something that had always seemed normal but now, in retrospect, stood out. The message wasn't from me. The preview read, "Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you." My stomach dropped, a sickening blend of disbelief and dread hitting me all at once. My first instinct was denial. Maybe it wasn't what it seemed. Maybe it was just a misunderstanding, some innocent flirtation that didn't mean anything. But my hands betrayed me, trembling as I unlocked her phone. It wasn't a misunderstanding. The full text message painted a picture that left no room for doubt. "Last night was incredible. I can't stop thinking about you. I love the way you make me feel. The way you—" I stopped reading, unable to stomach the rest. The message was signed with a nickname, T. I knew who that was. It was her boss, the same executive who had charmed us both at a company dinner 6 months prior. I had shaken his hand, thanked him for supporting my wife's career, and thought nothing of the glances they exchanged. I stared at the phone for what felt like hours, though it was only minutes. A million thoughts raced through my mind. How long had this been going on? Was I blind, or had I chosen not to see? My first instinct was to confront her immediately, but something stopped me. I needed more information. If I acted without proof, she could spin the story, make me doubt myself, or turn the tables entirely. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, alternating between numbness and fury. By the time she came home, I had managed to collect myself enough to act normal, or as normal as someone in my position could. But my mind was already racing ahead, planning my next move. That night, while Laura slept beside me, I made my way to her laptop. She often used it for work, syncing her accounts for convenience. I told myself I was justified, that I had every right to look. What I found confirmed everything. And more. Emails, calendar invites, and even receipts for hotel bookings. This wasn't a fleeting affair. It was a full-blown relationship. One email stood out, not because of its content but because of its timing. It was dated the same day as my son's birthday. While I had been organizing a party, decorating the house, and ensuring everything was perfect, she had been with him. The betrayal felt personal, a knife twisted deeper with every discovery. Yet even as the evidence piled up, I felt frozen. I couldn't confront her, not yet. I needed time to process, to figure out how to approach this without losing my footing. I started to wonder, was I the problem? Had I neglected her, failed her in some way? But no amount of self-blame could excuse the lies, the deceit, the audacity of her actions. As the days passed, I noticed things I hadn't before. The way she guarded her phone, the way her mood seemed to improve after work trips. The excuses that once seemed plausible now felt paper-thin. But the most painful realization was that she wasn't sorry. She didn't even suspect that I knew, carrying on as though nothing had changed. That's when I decided I couldn't handle this alone. If there was one person who might help me, it was her boss's wife. I had only met her once, in passing at a corporate event. Let's call her Emma. Reaching out to her felt risky, invasive even, but I couldn't ignore the nagging feeling that she deserved to know the truth just as much as I did. When I called Emma, I half expected her to hang up or accuse me of lying. But she didn't. Her voice was steady, almost too calm, as I explained who I was and why I was calling. When I finished, there was a long silence. Then, In a voice that betrayed a crack in her composure, she said, "I knew something was wrong. I just didn't know how to prove it." That moment marked the beginning of an unlikely alliance, one born out of shared betrayal and a mutual desire for justice. After my conversation with Emma, the betrayal felt even heavier. It wasn't just about me anymore. There was another family torn apart by the same affair. Emma had suspected her husband, let's call him Tom, for months. She told me how he had become emotionally distant, traveling more often for business, and taking calls in hushed tones. Hearing her describe his behavior was like listening to my own life being narrated back to me, detail for detail. Emma and I decided to pool our resources. She shared what she knew, his work calendar, some suspicious charges on their joint credit card, and even a few cryptic messages she had seen but hadn't fully understood until now. In return, I handed over screenshots of the texts I had found, as well as the emails and receipts. Together, we painted a picture so vivid it was impossible to deny. But it wasn't just the evidence that bonded us. It was the raw emotion. Emma told me about the nights she had stayed up late, waiting for Tom to come home, wondering if she was being paranoid. She admitted to blaming herself at times, thinking she wasn't enough for him. Her vulnerability mirrored my own. I had spent the last few weeks oscillating between rage and self-doubt, questioning whether I had somehow driven Laura away. But now, hearing Emma's story, I realized the affair wasn't about us. It was about them, their selfishness, their entitlement, their complete disregard for the people they claimed to love. Still, I wasn't ready to confront Laura. Not yet. Emma and I agreed to keep gathering information, not just for our peace of mind but to ensure we had the upper hand when the time came. Emma was a strategist by nature, calm, composed, and methodical. She suggested we approach this like a chess game, planning our moves carefully to ensure maximum impact. And so, for weeks we worked in secret. Emma managed to retrieve more damning evidence from Tom's phone while he was asleep, forwarding it all to me. I, in turn, installed software on Laura's laptop that logged her keystrokes, giving me access to everything she typed, from emails to search queries. What I found was nauseating. Not only were they coordinating rendezvous, but they were also mocking us, complaining about how boring their spouses were, how they deserved to be with someone who truly understood them. One message in particular stayed with me. Laura had written, "Sometimes I think about just leaving, but it would hurt the kids too much. It's easier to just play the part at home and save the real me for you." The real me. The phrase echoed in my mind for days. Had I only ever known the version of her that was playing the part? As the weeks passed, the tension in my home became unbearable. Laura didn't suspect that I knew, but I couldn't hide my growing resentment. I avoided her touch, her questions, her attempts at small talk. Meanwhile, Emma was going through the same thing. Tom, she said, was acting cocky, almost smug, as if he thought he was untouchable. But he wasn't. Neither of them was. The first confrontation didn't go as planned. I had rehearsed what I would say to Laura 1,000 times. I imagined her breaking down, apologizing, begging for forgiveness. I thought I would feel vindicated, finally able to unleash the storm of emotions I had been bottling up. But reality is rarely as clean as we imagine it. It was a Thursday night. The kids were in bed, and Laura was scrolling through her phone on the couch. I sat across from her, clutching my own phone like it was a lifeline. My heart pounded as I opened the folder containing all the evidence I had collected. "Laura," I began, my voice shaking slightly, "I need to ask you something." She glanced up, her face a mask of mild annoyance. "What's up?" I slid my phone across the table, the screen displaying one of the more explicit texts she had sent to Tom. Her eyes widened, then narrowed. For a moment, I thought she might try to deny it, but then she let out a bitter laugh. "So, you've been spying on me?" she said, her tone cold. "Don't you dare turn this around on me," I snapped. "How long, Laura? How long have you been lying to me, to our kids?" She sighed, setting her phone down with exaggerated care. "Look, I didn't plan for this to happen, okay? It just did. I wasn't happy, and Tom, he made me feel alive again. You wouldn't understand. I wouldn't understand? I could barely contain my anger. I understand perfectly. You lied. You cheated. You destroyed our family for what? Some executive who probably sees you as nothing more than a side piece. Her face hardened. You don't get it. You've been coasting for years, ignoring me, taking me for granted. Maybe if you had put in half as much effort as Tom. I cut her off, standing abruptly. Don't you dare blame me for your choices. You made this mess, Laura. And now you're going to face the consequences. She tried to argue, but I was already walking away. I didn't have the patience or the energy to deal with her excuses. Upstairs, I locked myself in the guest room, my hands shaking as I texted Emma to let her know what had happened. Her reply came quickly. I confronted Tom tonight too. He denied it at first, but when I showed him the emails, he shut up pretty fast. He knows it's over. It was a small comfort, knowing I wasn't alone in this battle. But as I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that the worst was yet to come. The morning after the confrontation was eerily quiet. Laura went about her usual routine as though nothing had happened. Her face a perfect mask of calm. But I knew better. She wasn't calm. She was calculating. I had learned enough about her over the years to know that when she shut down emotionally, it wasn't because she was giving up. It was because she was planning her next move. I wasn't sitting idle, though. That same morning, I contacted a divorce attorney. I hadn't made up my mind entirely about what I wanted yet, but I knew I needed to be prepared. Laura's betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was financial. Between her high-paying job and her relationship with Tom, I knew she might try to use her position of power to manipulate the outcome of any potential separation. Meanwhile, Emma was fighting her own battle. She called me later that day, her voice a mix of exhaustion and resolve. Tom's furious, she said. He thinks I'm bluffing about the divorce, but I've already spoken to my lawyer. He's panicking because he knows I've got enough to clean him out. He's begging me to reconsider, but I'm done. I'm so done. Hearing her say those words sparked something in me. Emma's strength in the face of everything gave me the courage to move forward. I told her about my conversation with Laura, how she had tried to deflect and blame me. She's not sorry, I said, my voice breaking. She's not even pretending to be sorry. That's because she doesn't think she's done anything wrong, Emma replied. They never do. In their minds, they're the victims, not us. The days that followed were a blur of legal consultations, paperwork, and tense exchanges with Laura. She didn't waste any time trying to turn the narrative in her favor. To our friends and family, she painted herself as a woman who had been neglected and emotionally abandoned. I knew she was trying to get ahead of the story, but I refused to play her game. Emma, on the other hand, was handling her situation with the kind of grace I could only aspire to. She kept Tom at arm's length, refusing to engage in his manipulative attempts to guilt her into staying. Instead, she focused on her children, ensuring they felt safe and loved despite the upheaval in their lives. Our conversations became a lifeline for me. Every night, after the kids were in bed, we would talk for hours, sharing our frustrations, fears, and small victories. What started as a partnership of necessity began to feel like something more. Emma understood me in a way no one else could because she was living the same nightmare. Emma and I didn't plan to bond as much as we did. At first, we were two strangers united by a shared tragedy. Two lives left in ruins by the same selfish affair. In the days following our confrontations with Tom and Laura, we leaned on each other for strength. The phone calls started as purely practical. Updates on legal matters, venting frustrations, sharing strategies for dealing with our exes. But they quickly evolved into something more. I remember one particular night when we both couldn't sleep. Emma called me around midnight, her voice low and hoarse. "Do you ever feel like you're the crazy one?" she asked. "Like maybe they're right, and we're the problem?" Her words hit me like a punch to the gut because I had been thinking the same thing. Laura's accusations during our argument still lingered in my mind. She had called me neglectful, unloving, boring. For days, I replayed her words, wondering if I had been blind to her unhappiness. "All the time," I admitted. But then I remember, we didn't cheat. They did. Whatever problems we had, they chose to blow up their lives instead of facing them. Emma sighed on the other end of the line. Yeah, I can't believe this is my life now. I never thought Tom could be this person. He was always so charming, so put together. I feel like I don't even know who I married. I wanted to comfort her, but I didn't know how. The truth was, I felt the same way about Laura. The woman I had shared my life with for over a decade now felt like a stranger. A stranger who had torn apart my world without a second thought. We talked for hours that night, sharing stories about our marriages, our kids, and the dreams we had once held for the future. Emma told me how she had met Tom in college, how they had been inseparable in those early years. She described the sacrifices she had made to support his career, putting her own ambitions on hold to raise their 3 kids while he climbed the corporate ladder. He used to tell me I was his rock, she said, her voice breaking, that he couldn't have done any of it without me. And now I'm just disposable. Her words mirrored my own fears. Had Laura ever truly loved me? Or had I just been a convenient placeholder until someone better came along? The thought made my chest ache. But as painful as those conversations were, they also brought us closer. Emma and I understood each other in a way no one else could. We didn't have to explain the pain, the anger, the sense of betrayal. It was all unspoken, yet completely understood. It wasn't long before our calls turned into plans to meet in person. I feel like I know you better than most of my friends, Emma said one day. But I've only ever seen you once. Let's meet up, just as friends. No pressure. I hesitated at first, unsure of how I felt about the idea. Was it too soon? Too complicated? But deep down, I wanted to see her. Emma was the only person who truly understood what I was going through, and being around her felt safe. We met at a quiet coffee shop on a rainy afternoon, far enough from either of our neighborhoods to avoid running into anyone we knew. Emma was even more striking in person than I remembered. She had a way of commanding attention without even trying, her presence both calming and magnetic. We sat for hours, talking about everything and nothing. She made me laugh with her dry sense of humor, pointing out the absurdities of our situations. "Can you believe we're here?" she said at one point, shaking her head with a wry smile. "Two people who should probably hate each other, bonding over how much we hate our exes. Life's weird." Huh. I laughed, despite myself. "Yeah, it is. But honestly, I'm glad you're here. I don't think I could have gotten through this without you." Her smile softened, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. The rain outside had stopped, leaving the world quiet and still. When we finally parted ways, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, gratitude, and something else I couldn't quite place. Emma had become more than just an ally in this mess. She was a friend, a confidant, and maybe, just maybe, something more. The idea was Emma's, and it came up during one of our late-night phone calls. "Do you ever wonder what would happen if we started dating?" she asked, her tone half serious. I blinked, caught off guard. "What do you mean?" She laughed, a sound that was both light-hearted and mischievous. "Think about it. Tom and Laura both pride themselves on being the center of attention, right? What if we flipped the script? If we started dating, even just for show? It would drive them absolutely insane." At first, I thought she was joking, but the more we talked about it, the more the idea appealed to me. It wasn't just about revenge, though that was certainly part of it. It was about taking back control, rewriting the narrative they had tried to force on us. Our first date was more of a strategic outing than a romantic one. We went to a popular restaurant in the city, the kind of place where people love to gossip. Emma made sure to post a photo on her Instagram, a casual shot of the two of us smiling over dinner, the caption cryptic enough to spark curiosity. The reaction was immediate. Laura texted me the next morning, her tone a mix of anger and disbelief. "Are you seriously dating her?" she wrote. "This is pathetic, even for you." I didn't respond. Emma and I had agreed not to engage directly. Let them stew in their own jealousy. Meanwhile, Tom's reaction was even more dramatic. According to Emma, he called her 3 times that night, leaving increasingly incoherent voicemails. "He's losing it," she said, laughing as she played one of the messages for me. He actually said, "How could you do this to me? Like, are you kidding me? You're the one who cheated." But something unexpected happened during those fake dates. Emma and I started to realize how much we genuinely enjoyed each other's company. What had started as a game began to feel real. One evening, after a particularly fun night out, Emma turned to me as we walked back to our cars. "This isn't fake anymore, is it?" she asked, her voice soft. I looked at her, realizing she was right. "No," I said, "it's not." The decision to move in together came faster than either of us expected. What started as a simple experiment in companionship, built on the rubble of our failed marriages, had grown into something we couldn't ignore. Emma and I had gone from allies to friends, and then to something far deeper. And while our exes seethed in the background, throwing their petty tantrums, we were focused on building a life that wasn't defined by betrayal or bitterness, but by hope and love. Still, blending two families was no small task. Between us, we had 5 kids, my 2 and her 3, and the logistics alone were overwhelming. Emma's home was large enough to accommodate us all, so we decided to make that our base. The first few days after the move were a whirlwind of unpacking, organizing, and negotiating new routines. But beneath the chaos was a current of excitement, a feeling that we were embarking on something new and transformative. The kids were, unsurprisingly, hesitant at first. My son, Alex, who was 8, struggled with the idea of sharing a room with Emma's youngest, a precocious 6-year-old named Lily. My daughter, Sophie, who was 10 and fiercely protective of me, made it clear that she wasn't thrilled about the change. Emma's older 2 kids, teenagers with their own complex feelings about their parents' divorce, were more reserved, keeping their distance as they tried to process the new dynamic. Emma and I knew this wouldn't be easy, but we were determined to make it work. We sat the kids down together the first weekend after the move and laid out our expectations. "This is a big change for all of us," Emma said, her voice calm but firm. "We're not asking you to love it right away, but we are asking you to be kind and respectful to each other. This is a fresh start, and we want it to feel like a home for everyone." The kids nodded reluctantly, but the tension in the room was palpable. I knew it would take more than words to convince them that this new arrangement could work. Actions, not promises, would be what mattered. Over the next few weeks, we worked hard to create a sense of normalcy. Family dinners became a staple, with each kid taking turns picking the menu. Emma, ever the organizer, instituted a chore chart that divided responsibilities evenly, making it clear that this was a shared household, not one where the kids could sit back and let the adults handle everything. At first, there were plenty of bumps in the road. Alex and Lily bickered constantly, fighting over everything from toys to bedtime routines. Sophie refused to engage with Emma, answering her questions with curt, one-word replies. And Emma's teenagers, Mia and James, treated me like a stranger who had invaded their space. It wasn't easy, but Emma and I were patient. We knew trust would take time to build. Then, slowly but surely, things began to shift. The turning point came one Friday evening when we decided to have a family game night. Emma and I thought it might be a disaster, but to our surprise, the kids got into it. Watching Alex and Lily team up against Sophie and James during a heated round of charades was like watching walls crumble. By the end of the night, everyone was laughing, even Mia, who had been the most resistant to the change. From that moment on, the atmosphere in the house began to soften. It wasn't perfect. There were still arguments and misunderstandings, but the kids started to see each other not as rivals but as part of the same team. Alex and Lily formed an unlikely bond over their shared love of building elaborate Lego structures, while Sophie found a mentor in Mia, who taught her how to play the guitar. James, who had initially avoided me, started asking for advice about cars and college applications. Through it all, Emma and I worked hard to balance our roles as partners and parents. We were careful not to overstep boundaries with each other's kids, giving them the space to adjust to this new reality on their own terms. At the same time, we made sure to carve out time for ourselves, stealing quiet moments after the kids went to bed to talk, laugh, and dream about the future. Our exes, predictably, were furious. Laura sent me an email accusing me of forcing the kids into an unstable environment, claiming that my relationship with Emma was selfish and inappropriate. I didn't bother responding. Emma's ex, Tom, was equally unhinged, calling her repeatedly to demand answers about why I was living in his house. Emma blocked his number after one particularly aggressive voicemail, and we filed a formal request to modify their custody arrangement to minimize his involvement. But the best part of all was watching Laura and Tom's relationship implode. Whatever spark they had shared during their affair had clearly fizzled out, and without the thrill of secrecy, their differences became glaringly obvious. Word got back to us through mutual acquaintances that they were fighting constantly, each blaming the other for their respective divorces. Emma and I didn't dwell on their misery for long, though. We were too busy building a life that was better than anything we had imagined. Our home was far from perfect, but it was filled with love, laughter, and the promise of a brighter future. For the first time in a long time, I felt truly happy. The fallout from our decision to move in together was swift and ugly. Laura and Tom, already struggling with the collapse of their relationship, took our new arrangement as a personal affront. It was almost comical, watching two people who had so gleefully shattered their own families suddenly react as if Emma and I were the villains. But their anger was nothing compared to the chaos they unleashed in the weeks that followed. It started with the emails. Laura, who had mostly kept her distance after our divorce proceedings began, suddenly became hyper-involved in every aspect of co-parenting. She bombarded me with long, accusatory messages, picking apart every detail of my parenting decisions and demanding explanations for everything, from the kids' bedtime routines to the meals we cooked. "You're putting them in an unstable environment," she wrote in one particularly venomous email. "Moving them into a house with strangers just to spite me? Do you even care how this is affecting them?" I didn't respond. There was no point in engaging with her when she was like this. But her words still got under my skin. She was trying to frame me as reckless and irresponsible, even though she was the one who had destroyed our marriage. Her hypocrisy was staggering. Emma wasn't faring much better. Tom, predictably, took the news even worse than Laura. He wasn't subtle about his intentions. He wanted Emma back, not out of love but out of ego. He couldn't stand the idea of her moving on, especially not with someone like me. His messages to her were a bizarre mix of pleading, threats, and outright manipulation. "You're making a mistake," one message read. "This guy doesn't care about you or the kids. You're throwing everything away for someone who's just using you to get back at me." Emma blocked him after that, but the drama didn't stop there. Tom started showing up at the kids' extracurricular activities, lingering longer than usual and making pointed comments to Emma whenever he got the chance. "You're playing house with him now?" he sneered one evening after Lily's dance class. "How long do you think this is going to last? A year? 2? He's going to leave you, Emma. They always do." Emma brushed him off, but I could see how much it rattled her. She hated conflict, especially when it spilled over into the kids' lives. It wasn't just Tom's words that bothered her. It was the way he was using their children as pawns, subtly trying to turn them against her. But Tom and Laura's antics didn't stop at petty insults and passive-aggressive emails. They escalated in ways that bordered on harassment. One afternoon, I came home to find Laura sitting in her car outside our house. She wasn't there to pick up the kids. It wasn't her custody day. She was just watching. I confronted her, and she launched into a tirade about how I was poisoning our children against her. "You've brainwashed them," she shouted. "Alex barely talks to me anymore, and Sophie acts like I'm some kind of monster. This is your fault." I stood my ground, refusing to let her bait me. "They're hurt, Laura. They're still processing what you did. Don't blame me because you don't like the consequences of your actions." She drove off in a huff, but the incident left me shaken. It was one thing to deal with her over email or text. It was another thing entirely to have her show up unannounced, her anger simmering just beneath the surface. Emma and I decided it was time to set firmer boundaries. We reached out to our lawyers and documented every instance of harassment, from Laura's emails to Tom's confrontations at the kids' events. We even installed security cameras outside the house just in case. Despite the chaos, Emma and I refused to let our exes dictate the tone of our lives. We focused on the kids, doing everything we could to make them feel safe and loved. Family movie nights, weekend hikes, and spontaneous ice cream runs became staples in our household, moments of joy that reminded us why we were fighting so hard to protect what we had built. The kids, for their part, were adapting better than we could have hoped. Alex and Lily were inseparable now, their initial bickering giving way to a genuine sibling bond. Sophie and Mia had grown close, spending hours together in Mia's room, listening to music and experimenting with makeup. Even James, who had been the most resistant to the change, started to warm up to me. One afternoon, he asked if I could help him fix his bike, and I nearly cried at the small but meaningful gesture. But as things settled at home, the same couldn't be said for Laura and Tom. Their relationship, already fragile, seemed to crumble under the weight of their jealousy and resentment. Mutual acquaintances told us about their explosive arguments, most of which centered on Emma and me. He blames her for everything, one mutual friend told Emma over coffee. Says she pushed him into the affair because she was too focused on the kids. But then she turns around and blames him for ruining her reputation. It's a mess. Emma and I didn't take much satisfaction in their misery. Not anymore. It felt pointless to dwell on their drama when we had so much to look forward to. Still, it was hard not to feel a sense of poetic justice. They had made their bed, and now they had to lie in it. The most satisfying moment came a few weeks later when Laura's lawyer reached out with a proposal. She wanted to renegotiate the custody arrangement, claiming that the kids were unhappy in my care and needed more time with her. My lawyer and I laughed at the blatant attempt to regain control, especially since the kids themselves had made it clear that they were thriving in our new home. In the end, Laura and Tom were left to stew in their own bitterness, while Emma and I continued to build something beautiful. The chaos they had unleashed had brought us together, and nothing they did could take that away. There's a special kind of satisfaction in seeing people reap the consequences of their own actions. For months, Laura and Tom had acted as though they were untouchable, their lies and selfishness causing nothing but chaos for the people around them. But as Emma and I built a life of stability and happiness, their worlds continued to unravel. And this time, there was no one left for them to blame but themselves. Laura's life seemed to spiral first. Losing custody of the kids for most of the week had hit her harder than she cared to admit. She had always been the one in control, the one who called the shots, and now she was stuck watching from the sidelines while I thrived in the role of full-time parent. To make matters worse, her reputation at work had taken a massive hit after her affair with Tom became public knowledge. While no formal action had been taken against her, the whispers and side eyes from her colleagues were enough to erode her confidence. The final straw came when Laura left me a voicemail one afternoon. I had just gotten home from picking up the kids when my phone buzzed. Her voice was trembling, a mix of anger and desperation. "Do you think this is funny?" she snapped. "Do you think you've won? Because let me tell you, this isn't over. You're ruining my life, and one day, the kids are going to see you for the manipulative bastard you really are." I didn't respond. Instead, I saved the voicemail and sent it to my lawyer. A protective order was filed shortly after, restricting Laura from contacting me outside of matters directly related to the children. It wasn't just about protecting myself. It was about protecting the kids from her toxic outbursts. I couldn't let her bitterness seep into the new life we were building. Emma, meanwhile, was watching Tom face his own reckoning. His financial obligations, both alimony and child support, were bleeding him dry, and his high-paying job couldn't cover the lifestyle he had grown accustomed to. Emma's lawyer had been relentless during the divorce proceedings, ensuring she received everything she and her kids were entitled to. Tom had underestimated her, thinking she would fold under pressure, but Emma proved him wrong at every turn. "He's drowning," she told me one evening, her tone equal parts amused and exasperated. Apparently, he tried to convince his boss to give him a raise to cover his personal expenses. Can you imagine? The audacity. We both laughed, though neither of us felt much pity for him. Tom had built his empire on lies and arrogance, and now it was all crumbling beneath him. The cherry on top came when Emma received a call from a mutual friend who worked in the same industry as Tom. "Did you hear?" the friend asked, barely able to contain her glee. "Tom's getting demoted. Apparently, his little affair with Laura didn't go over well with the board. They're moving him to a less prominent role to avoid further scandal." Emma relayed the news to me that night, and we toasted with glasses of wine. It wasn't just about the schadenfreude, though that was certainly part of it. It was about the sense of justice. For so long, it had felt like Tom and Laura were walking away unscathed while we were left to pick up the pieces. But now, the scales had finally tipped in our favor. The kids, thankfully, were shielded from most of the drama. Emma and I made a point of keeping things as normal as possible for them, even as the storm swirled around us. Our blended family had found its rhythm, and the once awkward dynamics between the kids had transformed into genuine camaraderie. Watching them play together, share jokes, and defend each other during sibling spats was a joy I hadn't expected. But even with the progress we'd made, there were still challenges. Laura and Tom's bitterness had a way of creeping in, often through subtle attempts to undermine our parenting. Laura, for instance, started spoiling Alex and Sophie during her weekends with them, buying them expensive gifts and letting them do whatever they wanted. At first, I worried it would create resentment, but to my surprise, the kids saw through it. "She's trying too hard," Sophie said one night as we cleaned up after dinner. "It's like she's trying to buy us. I wish she'd stop." Hearing her say that broke my heart, but it also gave me hope. The kids were resilient, stronger than I had given them credit for, and they were starting to see the truth for themselves. Emma faced a similar struggle with Tom, who made it a point to badmouth her to their kids every chance he got. But Emma, ever the calm and collected one, refused to stoop to his level. Instead, she focused on being the best mother she could be, letting her actions speak louder than his words. "He can say whatever he wants," she told me one night as we sat on the couch, the kids fast asleep upstairs. "The kids know who's really there for them. That's all that matters." Her strength amazed me every day. Despite everything she had been through, Emma had managed to hold onto her kindness, her humor, and her unwavering love for her children. She was my rock, the person who kept me grounded even when the world felt like it was spinning out of control. The joy of justice wasn't just about watching Laura and Tom fall apart. It was about reclaiming our own happiness. For so long, we had been defined by their betrayal, but now we were free to define ourselves on our own terms. Our home was filled with laughter, warmth, and a sense of peace that neither of us had felt in years. And as Laura and Tom continued to burn bridges and alienate the people around them, Emma and I focused on building something that would last. A family, a partnership, and a future built on trust and love. The past no longer held power over us. We had taken our pain and turned it into something beautiful, and no one could take that away. If there was one thing Laura and Tom refused to accept, it was that Emma and I had moved on. Not just from them, but from the chaos they had tried to drag us into. While their relationship had imploded spectacularly, they were still bound to us through the kids, and they seemed determined to use co-parenting as their last weapon. For Laura, it started small. Deliberate lateness during custody exchanges, subtle digs at Emma when we crossed paths, and emails filled with veiled accusations about how I was raising Alex and Sophie. First, I ignored it. I wanted to keep the peace for the kids' sake. But the more I let her push, the more emboldened she became. Soon, the minor inconveniences turned into outright sabotage. One Friday evening, she was supposed to drop the kids off at 6 p.m. Emma had planned a family movie night, complete with popcorn and a pile of blankets in the living room. By 6:30, Laura still hadn't shown up. I texted her, trying to keep my tone neutral. "Hey, are you on your way? The kids are waiting." Her response came 5 minutes later. "Running late. Be there when I can." It was almost 8 p.m. by the time she arrived, unapologetic and indifferent. Alex and Sophie came inside looking exhausted, clutching bags of fast food that Laura had bought them on the way. When I asked why she was late, she shrugged and muttered something about traffic. But the smirk on her face told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. Emma faced similar challenges with Tom. He seemed to view every interaction as an opportunity to assert his dominance. whether it was by questioning her decisions about their kids' extracurricular activities or making snide remarks about me during pickups. But the worst came when he started manipulating the kids directly. One evening, Emma's oldest, Mia, came home visibly upset. Emma pulled her aside, and after some coaxing, Mia finally admitted what was bothering her. Dad said, "He said you don't care about him or us anymore. That you're too busy playing house with your new boyfriend to notice." Emma's face fell, but she didn't let Mia see how much it hurt. Instead, she reassured her daughter with the calm strength I had come to admire so much. "Mia, listen to me," she said, kneeling so they were at eye level. "I will always love you and your brother and sister more than anything. No one will ever replace you in my heart. Do you understand that?" Mia nodded, but I could see the damage Tom's words had done. It infuriated me. How could someone weaponize their own children like that? Emma and I talked late into the night about how to handle it. We agreed on one thing. No matter what Laura and Tom did, we would never stoop to their level. But co-parenting wasn't just about dealing with Laura and Tom. It was about finding ways to make it work for the kids. Alex and Sophie were still adjusting to splitting their time between two households, and while they loved being with Emma and me, they also missed their mother. I could see it in the way Alex's mood shifted when it was time to go back to her house, or the way Sophie hesitated before answering questions about her weekends with Laura. Emma's kids faced similar struggles. Lily, her youngest, had started acting out during transitions, throwing tantrums and refusing to leave when it was time to go to Tom's house. James, her middle child, withdrew entirely, retreating into his room whenever he came back from a visit with his dad. Even Mia, who tried to put on a brave face, was clearly carrying the weight of her parents' fractured relationship. Emma and I knew we couldn't control what happened in Laura's and Tom's homes, but we could control what happened in ours. We made a conscious effort to create a space where the kids felt safe, loved, and valued. We listened when they needed to talk, gave them space when they needed it, and worked hard to show them that their feelings mattered. One of the most meaningful changes came when we started having regular family meetings. Every Sunday evening, we'd gather in the living room, and everyone would get a chance to share their thoughts. At first, the kids were hesitant. Alex would mumble a few words, Sophie would shrug, and Emma's kids would sit in awkward silence. But over time, the meetings became something they looked forward to. "I like that we all get to talk," Lily said one evening. "It's like nobody's yelling or fighting. It's nice." Hearing her say that brought tears to Emma's eyes. It was proof that, despite the challenges, we were making progress. Laura and Tom, of course, didn't take kindly to the new sense of stability in our home. Laura continued to push boundaries, finding new ways to disrupt our routine. One day, she dropped the kids off with a stack of new toys and told them they could only play with them at her house. It was a transparent attempt to make her home more appealing, and while the kids were excited at first, the novelty quickly wore off. Tom, on the other hand, ramped up his efforts to undermine Emma. He filed a motion to modify their custody arrangement, claiming she was neglecting the kids in favor of her new relationship. The allegations were baseless, but they forced Emma to spend weeks gathering evidence to defend herself. In the end, the court dismissed his motion, but the stress of it all took a toll. Through it all, Emma and I leaned on each other. Some nights, after the kids were in bed, we'd sit on the couch and vent about the latest drama. Other nights, we'd say nothing at all, simply holding each other in the quiet comfort of knowing we weren't alone in this fight. Despite the challenges, there were moments of joy that made it all worth it. Watching Alex and Lily build a Lego tower together, hearing Sophie play the guitar while Mia sang along, seeing James laugh at one of my terrible jokes. It was these moments that reminded us why we kept going. We weren't just surviving anymore. We were thriving. Co-parenting wasn't easy, but we were determined to do it on our terms. Laura and Tom could try all they wanted to disrupt our lives, but they couldn't take away what we had built. A home filled with love, resilience, and the unshakable belief that we were stronger together. Life is funny in the way it can force growth in the most unexpected circumstances. If someone had told me 2 years ago that I'd be raising a blended family of 5 kids with a woman I once bonded with over a shared hatred of our exes, I would have laughed in disbelief. But here we were, navigating the chaos and joy of this new life together, learning what it truly meant to build something from the ashes. Resilience became the theme of our lives. It wasn't just about enduring the fallout from Laura and Tom's betrayal. It was about thriving in spite of it. Emma and I had come to realize that the pain we'd experienced wasn't just something to move past. It was something to learn from. Every challenge, every confrontation, every sleepless night had taught us more about ourselves than we ever thought possible. The kids were our greatest teachers. Watching them adapt to their new reality was nothing short of inspiring. Alex, once shy and reserved, had blossomed into a confident and curious boy who loved asking endless questions about the world. Sophie, who had been guarded and hesitant to trust, was now one of the most compassionate and empathetic people I knew. Emma's kids were no different. Mia, with her quiet strength, had become a role model for her siblings, while James had found his voice and started opening up more. Even Lily, with all her fiery energy, had matured in ways that surprised us daily. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were still moments of doubt, moments when the weight of everything threatened to crush us. I'll never forget one night when Sophie came into my room after everyone else had gone to bed. She sat on the edge of my bed, her face pale and drawn. "Dad," she whispered, "do you think Mom will ever come back? Like, back to the way she used to be?" Her question broke my heart. I wanted to tell her that Laura would wake up one day, realize what she had done, and make amends. But I couldn't lie to her. "I don't know, sweetheart," I said gently. "But what I do know is that no matter what happens, you'll always have me, and Emma, and all your brothers and sisters. We're a team now, and we'll always be here for you." Sophie nodded, tears glistening in her eyes, and leaned into me for a hug. It was a moment that reminded me just how much the kids had been forced to grow up too soon. But it also showed me how much they were learning about strength and love, even in the face of loss. Emma and I also learned how to lean on each other in ways we hadn't before. In our past marriages, we had both carried the emotional weight alone, trying to make things work with partners who were unwilling or incapable of meeting us halfway. Now, we had each other's backs, and that made all the difference. When Emma had to spend weeks preparing to defend herself against Tom's baseless custody motion, I was there to support her, taking on extra responsibilities with the kids and reassuring her that she wasn't alone. And when Laura's antics pushed me to the brink of frustration, Emma was the one who grounded me, reminding me to focus on what really mattered. One evening, after a particularly stressful day dealing with Laura's latest email tirade, Emma and I sat on the porch with a bottle of wine, watching the kids play in the yard. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over everything, and for a moment, the chaos of the world seemed to melt away. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" Emma asked, her voice soft. I nodded, smiling. "All the time. Sometimes I can't believe we're actually here." She looked at me, her eyes filled with a mix of gratitude and affection. "I don't think I could have done this without you." "You don't give yourself enough credit," I replied. "You're stronger than you think." It was moments like these that reminded us why we kept fighting. We weren't just rebuilding our lives. We were creating something entirely new, something stronger and more meaningful than anything we had known before. Laura and Tom continued to hover on the fringes of our lives, like storm clouds that threatened to rain but never quite did. Their attempts to disrupt our happiness became increasingly desperate and ineffective, to the point where they were almost laughable. Laura tried to convince Alex and Sophie that Emma was trying to replace her, but the kids saw through her manipulations. Tom, meanwhile, spent more time complaining about his financial woes than actually being present for his children, which only deepened the rift between him and Emma's kids. As frustrating as they were, Laura and Tom no longer had the power to control our lives. Emma and I had built something they couldn't touch, a home filled with love, laughter, and the kind of resilience that comes from surviving the worst and coming out stronger on the other side. The greatest lesson we learned was the power of choice. Every day we chose to focus on the good instead of dwelling on the bad. We chose to prioritize the kids' well-being over our own anger. We chose to build each other up instead of tearing each other down. And in doing so, we discovered what it truly meant to love and be loved. Resilience wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving. It was about finding joy in the little things. A family game night where everyone ended up laughing so hard they cried. A quiet moment on the porch, watching the sun set. A simple thank you from one of the kids that meant more than any grand gesture ever could. Life wasn't perfect, but it was ours. And that was more than enough. If there's one thing Emma and I learned throughout this journey, it's that happiness isn't something you stumble upon. It's something you build, brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. And for the first time in what felt like forever, we were building a future that was truly our own. Not defined by betrayal, not ruled by bitterness, but shaped by love, resilience, and the family we'd created together. Our decision not to marry was a practical one, but it was also a reflection of how much we had grown. In the beginning, we worried that skipping marriage might feel like we were holding back, like we were somehow less committed. But over time, we realized it was the opposite. We didn't need a piece of paper or a ring to validate what we had. Our commitment wasn't bound by legalities or traditions. It was rooted in something much deeper: trust, respect, and an unwavering partnership. Instead, we opted for a cohabitation agreement, a pragmatic arrangement that kept our finances and legal responsibilities separate while acknowledging the life we were building together. It was a decision that worked for us, allowing us to navigate our new reality without the complications that had plagued our previous marriages. And honestly, it felt freeing to know that our bond wasn't tied to anything but our own choices. As the months turned into years, our blended family continued to grow stronger. The kids, once wary of each other and of us, had become inseparable. Alex and Lily were partners in crime, always concocting some elaborate plan or building something together. Sophie and Mia had formed a sisterly bond that reminded me of how close I'd been with my own siblings growing up. Even James, who had been the most resistant to the idea of change, started to thrive in the stability of our home. He joined the debate team at school, and Emma and I cheered him on at every competition, proud of how far he had come. Family traditions began to take root in ways that surprised us. Every Friday night became family dinner night, where we'd all cook together and share stories from the week. On Saturdays, we'd pack up the car and head out for a hike, exploring trails and parks that became our favorite escapes. And every December, we'd gather around the tree for what the kids dubbed the annual ornament battle, a chaotic competition to see who could come up with the most creative decoration. The little moments mattered the most. Watching the kids laugh during a board game, hearing Emma hum as she cooked dinner, sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee while the sun rose. It was in these quiet, simple moments that I realized how far we'd come. Life didn't have to be grand or perfect to be beautiful. It just had to be ours. Of course, Laura and Tom still lurked on the edges of our lives, though their influence had diminished significantly. Laura eventually gave up on trying to manipulate the kids, realizing that her attempts to turn them against me were only driving them further away. She still sent the occasional snide email or made a passive-aggressive comment during custody exchanges, but it no longer held any power over me. I had moved on, and so had the kids. Tom, predictably, continued to flounder. His demotion at work left him bitter and resentful, and his strained relationship with Emma's kids only deepened as they grew older and saw him for who he truly was. By the time Mia graduated high school, she had all but cut ties with him, choosing instead to focus on her future and the family she had built with us. Emma and I didn't celebrate their failures, but we couldn't deny the sense of justice in seeing the consequences of their actions catch up to them. They had tried to destroy us, but in the end, they had only destroyed themselves. And as they continued to spiral, we kept moving forward, focused on the life we were building together. One evening, as we sat on the back porch watching the stars, Emma turned to me with a thoughtful expression. "Do you think they ever regret it?" she asked. I knew who she meant, but I still took a moment to consider my answer. Maybe, but it doesn't matter, does it? Their choices don't define us anymore. We've got something they can't touch. She smiled, leaning her head against my shoulder. You're right, we do. That night, as I lay in bed next to Emma, I thought about everything we'd been through. The betrayal, the heartbreak, the chaos. It had all been part of the journey that had led us here. And while I wouldn't wish that pain on anyone, I couldn't deny that it had shaped us into who we were today. Stronger, wiser, and, most importantly, happier. The future we chose wasn't perfect, but it was ours. We chose love over bitterness, trust over fear, and family over everything. And as I looked at the life we had built together, I knew without a doubt that it was worth every battle, every tear, and every hard-fought step along the way. Because at the end of it all, we hadn't just survived. We had thrived. And that was the greatest victory of all. This concludes the story.